welcome to Bad Ideas, the show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg, and today's episode of Bad Ideas is brought to you by our featured patron, Theophilius823543.
Getting them digits.
Thank you, Theo. Today we're going to be talking about the Triplecast, which is not the thing from whatever Final Fantasy has a Triplecast in it. When I was Googling this, Tony, there was a lot of Final Fantasy talk, so I had to narrow it down. No, this is the innovation in Olympics watching that happened in 1992.
There seems to be a lot of random bad idea TV stuff that happened in the early 90s. It's like, I can kind of admire that they were going after it and trying to find new concepts.
It is very much about that, right? Where they're expanding. They haven't got the internet exactly yet, or at least not nearly anywhere close to the form that we're having. But there's this more interconnectedness of the world that's happening. And so people are trying new things. And this is the year that the Olympics were held in Barcelona, Spain. And in 1992, NBC had bought the rights to broadcast those Olympics for $400 million.
Damn.
It's a lot of money. They always lose money on these Olympic broadcasts. The only reason that the companies that broadcast them do it is so that they can promote their own shows while the Olympics are running. So hopefully they can get a boost in viewership later on. That's completely separate from the actual bad idea, but I thought that was really interesting when I was reading up on this.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's like, do they want it for the prestige? But no, it makes more sense because you're going to get a lot of commercial breaks where you can promote the Big Bang Theory or whatever.
Yeah, Two Broke Girls. Come and watch our hot new episode that's airing right after figure skating tonight. But in this Olympic coverage, there was another American company that wanted to get in on the action. And they were called Cablevision. Cablevision was a cable provider in New York, and they struck a deal with NBC to allow for a new kind of Olympics broadcast. Instead of the American-focused, glitzy, overproduced highlight reels that NBC would run many hours after the events had actually taken place, Cablevision would offer 3 separate channels of uncut Olympics action, and in many cases inaction, that would air live as it was happening. The footage would come from the live feed from Spain, with English commentators dubbed over for American audiences. It was an audacious plan, and the appeal was obvious, at least to me, because even back in the 90s, the network primetime coverage of Olympic events was just terrible. I kind of already mentioned how schmaltzy and overproduced it was, but if you've had that complaint about the Olympics recently, just know that it's not a new complaint.
Yeah, I remember the first Olympics I watched was the 1996 Olympics. I believe it was in Atlanta, Georgia. And it was just so overbaked.
There's this desire to make stories out of things. There's obviously the desire for people to see American athletes do well, which is understandable, right? But they play the music. They have like tons and tons of coverage and commentators talking over things to make sure that even the dumbest person can understand what's going on. And this coverage for the lowest common denominator was the only way that you could really see the Olympics before the days of the internet. There was no real way for an American to access anything but the nightly, late, overproduced coverage that NBC was putting on, and Cablevision saw an opportunity to change that. The Triplecast would be a 2-week-long pay-per-view event. And it would cost $125 if you wanted to see all of the Olympics. For another $50, you would get the special 3-button Triplecast remote control to easily switch between the 3 Triplecast feeds. The 3 feeds were color-coded in, what else? Red, white, and blue.
So France's colors.
Yes. The red channel was team sports like basketball and baseball. The white channel was gymnastics and boxing and some other stuff. And the blue channel was swimming and track and field events. So they would have all of these things running simultaneous, and you would just swap between the red, white, and blue with your controller. There were no commercials. It was nothing but a raw 12-hour feed of the events that was then repeated in the next 12 hours as a rerun.
Honestly, this doesn't sound like that bad of an idea. I watched a fair amount of Olympics on streams the last time it was around and, like, watched that live.
We'll get into some of this at the very end, but the actual concept of unadorned live Olympics coverage with very minimal American commentating is not the bad idea here. It's that the way it was packaged and presented as a pay-per-view event did not work. And there were doubts about how well it would work even from the very beginning. NBC had projected that 2 million people would sign up for Triplecast, but those estimates were based on a survey that they took, and they combined people who said they would definitely pay for Triplecast with people who said they would probably pay for Triplecast. And that's how they got their 2 million figure. It's always a bad idea to round up in these situations.
Yeah, you got to go with, like, worst possible scenario.
Right, it's almost certainly like half the people who said they would definitely pay for it, not 100% of the people who said they might pay for it. So NBC has this super optimistic 2 million number that they think will let them break even on their deal with Cablevision. Cablevision, on the other hand, is a lot more clear-eyed going into it. They have a projection of about 200,000, so they've dropped essentially an entire zero off of NBC's prediction. And that would be a much more realistic number, however, also a much less profitable number.
Yeah, it seems like there's an ambitious thing that would take a lot of infrastructure to set up, especially for an event that only happens every 2 years.
Well, in some sense, the idea of a pay-per-view event is a one-time event, right? Like, you do pay-per-view stuff with MMA fights.
Yeah,
so
with the UFC fights, like there's one coming up this coming weekend. And it's like you pay the $60 or whatever and you watch the fights.
So the idea of a one-time event that you would pay for is actually not that far out of the business model. But the problem was that they were expecting people to pay for something that they would be watching over a 2-week period. And the model of pay-per-view is much more driven toward a single event. Right? Here is something that you're going to consume in a couple or 3 hours, certainly in no more than an evening, and it'll be done. So you have all your friends over, you get your party supplies or whatever, you've paid your lot of money, and you enjoy your pay-per-view all in one sitting, whereas this Triplecast thing was going to last for 2 weeks. It was on 3 different channels, which was a whole other weird thing. Again, they needed the 3 different channels to put all the footage out there, but that was sort of a departure from how I assume pay-per-view works, Tony. I've never done it, but I don't expect to be switching between channels for pay-per-view.
Yeah, not really. Like, I'm sure that I'm trying to think of any other event that you would actually do that, and it's like, unless you're doing different languages, but that's also on different channels for a reason.
And baked into this problem was a problem with how they were going to promote it, because the Olympics are something that you maybe getting excited about months in advance. So they're running commercials for this pay-per-view event months before the Olympics are going to get here, but people don't generally buy a pay-per-view event months before it happens. Again, it's sort of an instant gratification. You buy it in the 48 hours before the event actually happens kind of thing. This idea of planning this far in the future for a pay-per-view event that would last for 2 weeks was just something that nobody had any concept of. It was tough to sell because there wasn't really anything else like it.
And there's no urgency for it at all.
No, because you're going to have the free coverage on NBC, and while it might suck, it's free. So there's that problem. On top of that, Cablevision had paired up with NBC, and the NBC affiliates were supposed to run ads telling people about the Triplecast. But the NBC affiliates locally, a lot of them said, listen, if people sign up for this, they're not going to want our coverage, which we're going to be running every night and putting commercials on, so we're not telling people about this.
Yeah, so it's eating their own thing.
Yeah, they're not the same company, but they were working together, but then the local stations wouldn't have gotten much of a kickback from that, so there's a weird interplay between all of what was going on there. So way before the Olympic torch was even lit, Triplecast was starting to look like a failure. Cablevision braces to take a loss on Triplecast, and I read many articles that were written at the time that were very skeptical about how many people were going to take this up. Cablevision is out in front of it saying, yeah, we got a couple 100,000 if we're lucky. People coming in, actually people signed up right now is about 100,000, and we're really hoping that goes up because we're trying to take as little of a bloodbath as possible. As if this isn't bad enough, Cablevision runs into some real problems with the logistics of providing Triplecast. The Cablevision president, Chuck Dolan, called his own Cablevision provider to order Triplecast, and the operator couldn't figure out if it was available in his area.
That always inspires confidence.
It's gotta be the worst thing. For one thing, imagine you're the operator, right? And the guy who owns the company calls you up and says he wants this package, and you're like, I don't know how to do that. Do we have that? There's no button here to push for the Triplecast. And then from Chuck Dolan's perspective, you're like, I've spent so much money on this. Why can't we? How do you not even know if you can get me, the company president, the option to watch this thing? This is insane.
I'm guessing that call went about as well as like mouthing off to Gordon Ramsay.
I don't have any information on how that exact thing went, but I would have to hope that Chuck Dolan would realize that exact operator probably was not the source of the problem. Hopefully. As the calendar ticked down to the lighting of the Olympic torch, some of the executives at Cablevision still held out hope that sales would come in at the last minute. Remember, they thought, okay, that last 48 hours, that's when people buy pay-per-view. That's when we're really going to start selling stuff. The Olympics hasn't started yet, but they will buy. They will buy as the Olympics come around. And that hope turned out to be completely futile. While millions of people tuned in to watch the Olympics on NBC, far fewer than 200,000 were on board for Triplecast. In a frantic dash to cut their losses, Cablevision tried offering a more limited version of Triplecast. There was a package you could buy that was for one day that cost $30, and they thought, okay, maybe people don't want to buy the whole 2 weeks of coverage, but we'll offer this limited version, and that's just like the fights, right? They'll want to see this.
If you want to see all the gold that's going out for a particular day of events, because a lot of times those ones are slow tournaments that lead to gold over the course of a few days. Like, I could see wanting to drop $30 instead of $100 on something like that. Makes sense.
Well, it might make sense to you, but it still didn't turn into anything really for Triplecast and Cablevision. They ended up not only desperately trying to sell these single-day tickets. I don't know what you call it. It's not a ticket when you buy
Close
a pay-per-view.
enough.
But also slashing the price from $30 to $20, and still the orders were just trickling in. Those who had shelled out for the expanded coverage gave it mixed reviews. According to the Chicago Tribune, quote, Triplecast viewing can be numbing, often an endless parade of lead-footed boxes, horses, and more horses, uninspired tennis matches, divers, volleyballers, and cyclists, end quote. Later in the same article they complained, quote, taking its pictures from the Spanish world feed, the images are often fuzzy and occasionally pictures don't match commentators' words. Graphics sometimes misidentify athletes, end quote. But on the positive side, in the same article they proclaimed, quote, nowhere else would you have seen the Japanese swimmer Koyoko Iwasaki crying on the medal podium as she accepted her gold medal in the 200-meter breaststroke, or the members of her family sitting in the stands, their eyes brimming with tears. Without the Triplecast, no TV viewer would have seen the best basketball battle of the games. Spain's come from behind 101-100 victory over Brazil, decided in the last 6 seconds, end quote. So, you can see the appeal of being able to have all these feeds, but the marketing and the medium just did not work well enough to make this a profitable idea.
And like the incentive of having a remote that you only get to use for 2 weeks and then just becomes clutter is kind of crappy too.
But it's only $50 extra, Tony.
And it's a souvenir.
Interestingly enough, one of the articles that I read about this, written at the time, mentioned how exhausting it was switching between those 3 channels. So maybe the remote was more helpful than you would have thought?
Maybe? I don't know. I'm just trying to see how it was really all that impactful to have a remote for 3 buttons.
They have red, white, and blue, though, Tony.
It's very patriotic.
It's patriotic.
Was it a gold metal-shaped remote?
I was not able to find a picture. Weirdly enough, I don't know what this remote looked like. I looked. If somebody has a picture of this remote, they could email me. I would love it.
I feel like it's probably something that like a geriatric person would use. It's like those calculators that are the size of a desktop so that they can see the buttons.
Yes.
It's just like 3 giant buttons.
About. Or those joke novelty remote controls that are like the size of a dinner plate with the big buttons.
I hope it was something like that. I hope it was like Texas-sized.
Needless to say, NBC scrapped the pay-per-view model on their next Olympics, but the idea of expanded coverage was something they kept exploring. Subsequent Olympic coverage would find a home on paid cable channels affiliated with the networks that were covering the Olympics each year, and then eventually on the internet. The dream of seeing uncut Olympics footage would eventually be realized, and as I mentioned, that's not the bad idea here. I loved the ability in the Winter Olympics this year to tune in to live coverage of the curling as it was happening. I know I'm weird for loving curling, but it was cool. And the American team this year was pretty cool. They didn't win, I don't believe, but they did pretty good. And I even tuned into some of the international curling to see how they would do.
It's always fun to me, like, seeing a sport that nobody cares about for the rest of time, and then it just becomes a major thing. Like, it just becomes all something people are going to talk about. It's always the figure skating, though, for the Winter Olympics, and I've never really enjoyed watching that.
Yeah, I don't care much about that either. But that's the beauty of this type of coverage. If you can choose what you want to watch, you don't have to have the figure skating shoved down your throat every night at 9 or whenever they run their Special Olympics coverage. You can actually see what you want to see. The problem is, most people aren't interested in paying a couple $100 to have that access. They found a model for it eventually, Tony, but pay-per-view was not the model, and that's why the Triplecast was a bad idea.
But it led to some good things that came about later, so sometimes you gotta fail to win.
That's accurate, Tony. Bad ideas pave the way to good ideas sometimes. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope that you liked the episode. If you really, really liked it, you can go over to patreon.com/humanechoes and help us out with your money. Go to the not pay-per-view, but pay-per-thanks model of supporting cool things that you like. And also, if you have a bad idea that you would like us to cover, let us know by sending an email to badideasshow@gmail.com.
Also, if you enjoy these podcasts, you do get access to the bonus podcast as a patron. So keep that in mind.
Yes, where it's just us shooting the bull, sometimes about things that become bad ideas topics, although certainly not focused on that.
Yep. All right.
We'll see you guys next week. Take care.
Have a good one.